And I didn't set out to represent or to build a stable of female artists, although somewhat early on, people started remarking that I had a lot of female artists.
That was Yancey Richardson, preeminent photography dealer who has been championing cutting-edge photo-based art for over 30 years. She's one of 4 trailblazing women photography dealers who joins me in the 4th episode of my 7-part collaborative series with AIPAD in the lead-up to the 2025 edition of the Photography Show, the oldest and longest-running art fair for photography, which takes place from the 23rd until the 27th of April at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. Throughout April, I'll be speaking with AIPAD members, past and present, about the history of the organisation and how the market for photography has grown and evolved over the past 50 years. This episode is a little different from previous instalments in that it combines 4 separate 15-minute conversations into one magazine-style podcast episode. Beginning in Paris with Adélie de Ipanema, co-founder of POLKA Galerie and magazine, and continuing in Atlanta, Georgia with Arnika Dawkins and later Anna Walker Skillman from Jackson Fine Art, and ending in New York with Yancey Richardson. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the program. You're listening to Subtext Discourse Art World podcast, highlighting unique perspectives on contemporary art and photography. I'm your host, Michael Dooney. So without further ado, let's begin with Adélie de Ipanema telling me about the founding of POLKA Galerie in Paris.
Actually, we found POLKA with my family. It's a family business. So we found POLKA 70 years ago. A long time ago now.
Yeah.
And actually, POLKA was born in two steps. The first one was just with the concept of a gallery, a simple gallery. And I found the gallery with my brother, Edouard. And a few months after, my father, Alain, joined the team. And we create a magazine. So POLKA is not only a gallery, but it's also a magazine. But a magazine, will tell some stories, explain something. So for us, the concept of the photography of POLKA is to explain how photographers are working, They don't just take photo, they explain something. So we can see some image in the wall in order to collect photo, but we can also read photo in the magazine with some authors and writers and everything. So this is the concept of POLKA. And I think it makes the difference between the others, which we try.
Yeah, I can't think of any other galleries that have a magazine or a publication that they regularly put out. What was your introduction to photography? Was your family involved with photography before?
Yeah, actually, my father was the director of Paris Match. I don't know if you know, it's a French magazine. It's an important magazine in France. I can say it's like Life in France.
Oh, really?
The magazine Life.
Yeah, wow.
Yes, so he used to work with very, very good photographer. And when I was a kid, I used to have a lot of photo in my wall because it was some friends of my father, my mother. So I was raised with photography in different worlds. So when we decided to set up a gallery with my brother, it's because we had a lot of photography in our place, in our wall, and we saw that friends love the photography and want to collect them. But at that time, it was very difficult to find a gallery in photography in Paris.
Really?
I mean, yeah, in Paris, maybe there is only 2, 3, 4 very good galleries, like Françoise Pavio, Agathe Gaillard, Magnum Gallery, but not a lot. So we decided in 2007 to found the gallery. The world was changed, with the internet, with the digital. The profession of photographer was very different, and photographer doesn't earn money than before, in press or publishing house. The budget were different. So for photographer, it was not a very good time. So when with my brother, we saw that people and friends liked photography in our world, we say there is something to create with this kind of photographer. There are no gallery, nothing. They are not very recognized in the art market. So maybe we can represent them in a gallery and try to do something with them in the art market. So we found the gallery POLKA like this, with this kind of photographer.
I'm just wrapping my head around that in 2007 that there weren't many photography galleries in Paris.
No, not a lot. So maybe not very famous. Now it's very different.
Yeah.
Now you have a lot of very good galleries of photography. But in 2007, at that time, there were not a lot of exhibition in photography in Paris. I remember when we decided to found the gallery with Edouard, my brother, we saw the first big exhibition in Paris at the Hôtel de Ville with Douaneau. And it was a very, very good success. And we say it's crazy that photography was not so important in this city. Paris is a birthplace of photography with Daguerre and Niepce and very loved by photographer. And at the same time, at this time, now it's very different. But at this time, photography was not important as today.
Yeah, wow. I'm shocked. Because we always hear about it. I guess we mentioned before we hit record that I'm talking with a lot of the people that are based in New York and they started kind of the market there, but that was in the 80s.
Yeah.
But then we always think of Paris, particularly from the photographers that were active there. But yeah, to know that even in the early 2000s that the market in Paris was still relatively unestablished.
But the market in photography in Paris was very slow at the time. Now it's totally different with Paris Photo, les rencontres d'art, le festival Lagacilly also, Photo Saint-Germain, Perpignan. There are a lot of events of photography and French people really like photography.
Yeah.
So now it's not the case. And Paris Photo, Arles, Perpignan, it's a very good attraction for the international people too.
Yes.
So for that, it's great. Yeah.
So was it difficult at the start?
When we start with yes, it was totally different than today. We were an itinerant gallery. We went directly to the collector. We have not a place, in Paris. We went to a theater, hotel. We create different exhibition in this place. So we went directly to the collectors. We didn't wait for them. So it was funny at this time. And we have now a very nice place in the Marais. It was actually very important to have something physical, an address. So we had this address in 2009, so 2 years after. But at first, yes, we were itinerant.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. I think Yancey, when I spoke to her from New York, she was saying everybody dealt privately. Like there was only 2 galleries, although there were other dealers. They were like, as you described, you had your stock of photographs and then you went to people or people came to you somehow, but you didn't have an exhibition space.
But New York is very active and very dynamic, not only in photography, in everywhere actually. And I remember when we created POLKA at the first year, we went to New York just to see Chelsea, at Chelsea and all the galleries were in New York. It was very wow.
Yeah.
It was crazy and very, very, very different than Paris.
I mean, that must have been super inspiring as well to see, what's possible.
Yeah, everything is possible if we have the motivation,
So when did you become an AIPAD member? Or how did you know about AIPAD outside of the US?
But AIPAD for us, for Europe, I'm talking about the point of view of European people, AIPAD is the first event in photography. It's an historical event. So we were very proud to be part of the AIPAD when we went to AIPAD at the first time. It was in 2017. It's a big association with, for me, in my opinion, it's a wonderful association with different dealers in all the world. Very international. So for us, it's a very dynamic and important to be part of this kind of event. And the market, the American market, is also very important for us. So it's important to go to the United States just for seeing our collectors, institution, museum, and actually everybody important in photography in America used to come to AIPAD, to visit AIPAD. So we have to be part of this kind of thing, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. How long after you launched the gallery did you have the magazine?
Yeah, when we found the gallery, the magazine will come 7 months after.
Oh, so it was around at the same time.
Well, so we're very, very, very close. And yes, it's very important because at the beginning, photography it's a complete medium. I mean, it's not only a piece of art or a collector's item. Photography means a lot of things. With the photography, we document the world, we tell a story, we keep something from a moment. For me, photography is like a painter of yesterday, but with a very much faster branch,
Yeah.
so he can work a lot. And when we create the magazine, it was to explain to the people how photography is important, how we can approach photography. I mean, we can buy a photography, we can see a photography in a show, we can read a photography in a book or in a magazine. We can do a lot of things with photography. So maybe it's because my father was a journalist and because I studied the journalism or everything. For me, it was very important to approach the medium like this. So the magazine is for us not only a catalog, it's very important in the concept. And for the photographer too, because when you join POLKA, when you are a photographer, you know that the work will be on the wall, of course, but also in the page of the magazine. And we will read differently photography. So that's why the gallery and the magazine make sense, actually.
In the magazine, do you show artists that you don't represent or photographers that aren't part of your roster?
Yes and no. Actually, in the magazine, you will see we have a very, very large portfolio. So, of course, it's only about our photographer. And we want to explore the world of our photographer. This is the main role of the magazine. But in the page of the magazine, you can see different exhibitions with different institutions, with different galleries.
Nice.
And we can, of course, open the magazine to other works. But the main portfolio, the main part of the magazine is about our photographer. But we work with more than 60 photographers. So we have a lot of things to say, to tell. Actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not a problem.
I read on your website that you've commissioned a lot of works with various artists over the years. Did you want to share any stories about that?
Yeah, we used to work with William Klein, Daido Moriyama, Sebastião Salgado, Marc Ribou, Elliot Erwitt, Joel Merovitz, and also some younger photographers like Yves Marchand and Romain Meffre. They are French, they are Japanese, they are Russian, they are American. We are very lucky because we work with a lot of very good photographers with different generations, and it's important. To show some works of William Klein, Elliot Erwitt. It's not the old generation, but the first generation, I can say that. And we have also some young photographer who works very differently. They have a lot of things to say, actually. So it's good, yeah.
What I was trying to ask is that I'd seen that I'm trying to think there's another word for it. Like you finance some projects or you help the photographers produce work.
Yeah, of course. But when we sell some works, we help actually in the same time the production of different works of photographer. Being a gallerist is not only a dealer, it's also very important to be with the photographer in life. A photographer is for me a member of my family. So we have to be there for every time. So for the production of a new work, sometimes we can buy some works in the order to help the photographer, or we can ask for different collector to help him to buy some, to pre-order some works. There is different way actually to help a photographer. But yes, it's a part of my job. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And how much? I suppose if you started in 2007 and the market for photography in France was underdeveloped or immature at the time.
Yeah, it was beginning for me. It was very different from today. Today we are lucky. We have a lot of galleries in Paris, and we have so many events in Paris or in France. Very interesting and attractive, like Paris Photo, Arles, Perpignan, Gaspé, Photo Saint-Germain. So very, very good institution. So now the market in France is better than before. Not better than before, but In 2007, yes, it definitely was not the same market. It's funny because we were growing up, yes, with some different collectors. We knew some small collectors at the beginning, and now the collection are very, very large and bigger. And it's very funny to see that, yes, a lot of things changed in 17 years.
How is it now then reaching new collectors?
How we do?
Yeah, like with the younger generation, because I'm often hearing people saying that, I don't know what the cutoff point is, but people under a certain age aren't collecting as much. And I know when I had my gallery in Berlin, I don't think there was anybody under 50 actually that bought anything from me. Most people were a bit older.
Well, the photography is great for a young collector because it's very how do you say affordable. It's not very expensive. We can buy a photography from a master of photography, a piece of master of photography for a few thousand of euros. If we compare with painting or design or another medium, it's not the case. I can take an example for example, yes, William Klein. I work with him. It's a wonderful photographer, very famous, maybe one of the best. And you can buy a piece of him for $4,000 or $5,000. It's not a lot for something like that, for somebody like this. Maybe like a Picasso or a Debussy. It's impossible, actually.
No, you wouldn't be able to, yeah.
So collectors, I think, know that. It's good for photography to have this possibility. And for the young collectors, we try to attract them with different collection. Actually, we present, of course, some young photographer with some not very expensive price. But also we ask for our bigger photographer, as Klein or Meyerowitz or Erwitt, to participate to some very specific collection. I don't know, maybe like a book with a print. So this is a possibility for a young collector to buy something from a master of photography for a few hundred of dollars or thousand. And you have something very specific and very original, So I think this is a goal also to the gallerist to propose this kind of work, And I think collectors know that. And for me, they know that if they want to buy something very specific, they can come to the gallery. It's not only a print; it could be a book with a print, or just a small print for, I don't know, a different event, and they can buy something very different. So we have to be very. It's important to have a lot of imagination. You have to create an animation. You understand? And
to engage audiences and to
the galleries. So we try to workshop, to do some book signings, some different things. So we try to be very active, and it's important to attract some new people.
That was Adelie Diapanema from POLKA Galerie in Paris. Next, I'm speaking with Arnika Dawkins from Arnika Dawkins Gallery in Atlanta, Georgia. She begins by telling me about her introduction to photography and her decision to open her own gallery.
So really, it goes back really far for me. I was a shutterbug after having my children. I just thought, oh, wow, I just would put them there. They were my muse. They would stay. I could just aim my camera around them. And I just fell in love with that. And then subsequently, I noticed going to family events, I was staging people. Oh. You stand over here. Let's take this shot over there. So it has been in me a long time. And then honestly, I noticed Jeannie Matusumi Ash. I saw an article with her, and she had a camera around her neck. And it was a woman that was like me. And it was so inspiring to see a Black woman photographer doing her thing. And I kind of kept that in the back of my mind, but was still enjoying being a shutterbug. Later in life, I decided to pursue my passion of photography. It had grown into a passion by then. And I got my master's at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Atlanta. And it was just a very wonderful experience, solidifying something that I had just in the back of my heart and mind had just always enjoyed. But after obtaining my master's, I posed 3 questions to myself. I'm like, okay, so what do I do with this newly minted degree? I knew I could be behind the camera, I could work at a gallery, or potentially I could own one. And I did some work at a local gallery that's prominent. I think you'll be speaking to Anna Walker Skillman. And I just fell in love with the process. It was just so enlightening to deal with work of artists and photographers that I had read about in the history of photography. It was especially warming to me to talk to collectors that were adding this work to their homes and living with it, and just witnessing every day the interactions of being at a gallery. I decided then to own my own gallery. In particular, I specialize in emerging photographers, kind of mid-career as well. Some underrepresented photographers are imagery of people from the African diaspora. And so if you looked at my roster, it's kind of split between people from the African diaspora or people from America, majority culture. But it's my specialization. It's not my exclusivity. And I've just been honored that these artists have entrusted me to represent them and show their work. And then another inspiration that I had, I mentioned about talking to the collectors during my internship and then subsequently working at Jackson Fine Art. I know about the joys of collecting art and living with it. My husband and I lived in New York City for a while he was doing some training in that area. And it was something that we really enjoyed, going to galleries and museums and just taking in the work. And we started building our own collection. So I know how much it is a joy to live with work that you have an interaction with. And I wanted to expose people like me to the joys of collecting. And so it's kind of a twin pillar of my gallery. And again, it's just a real privilege to be able to work with collectors as well as supporting artists in their creative endeavors.
Yeah, absolutely. How long were you in New York for? And
about 4 years.
Where are you based, actually?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia now. That's where the gallery is. And I'm actually off the beaten path a bit. A lot of times galleries are in gallery sections or art sections of town. When I started my gallery, I knew that my gallery would be a destination.
Yeah.
And I love Atlanta and I'm glad to be here. But I didn't think that being in my local space would confine me to showing the work. And so early on, I traveled with the work to different cities in the US. And subsequently, as the gallery evolved, started participating in art fairs to expose the work to a wide body of people. And grateful for some international collectors that we have been able to place work in. And so, yeah, Atlanta is home and it's where the gallery is, but it's not my confining space.
Because how is it when you go to fairs and things like that? I mean, I'm just thinking in the context, like, everybody knows New York. My geography of America isn't great. I did look on the map, so I saw where Atlanta and Georgia is.
I'm in the southern part of the U.S. and culturally very different from New York in the Northeast. But yeah, so the art fairs I thought were very helpful to expose the work that I'm showing to consumers of photography, fine art photography, museum curators, independent curators, collectors. And that has been, I think, very helpful in terms of exposing the artists that we have, the work of the artists that we have on our roster.
Yeah.
It's my philosophy. If you have to see the work to be able to appreciate the work, and then it's helpful for then you to make an action to acquire it or to consume it. And so by that exposure, I just think it's essential. Like there's in many ways like an ecosystem of art advocates, whether it's local to the city that I'm in, which Atlanta has great advocacy. So we're involved in Atlanta Center for Photography, formerly Atlanta Celebrates Photography. We work with local county officials to get the work out there to be enjoyed by a wide range of people. But I think it's that ecosystem of curators, museum professionals, galleries, arts institutions that really make a difference in solidifying the potential for the work to be seen and appreciated. I certainly try to do my part.
Yeah, because you mentioned when you were first getting involved with photography and you remember the image of another young African-American woman like yourself with a camera, it kind of resonated emotionally enough. You're like, oh, I can do that. Like that's something that
I could see myself. Jeannie Matusimi Ashe, she is the wife of the tennis pro Arthur Ashe. And just seeing her was very inspiring again, because it was like I could see myself, and I do love being behind the camera. But since I have established the gallery, which was 2012, I have devoted my creative time to finding creative ways to show the work to a vast amount of people. So the gallery does 2 to 3 exhibitions annually in person. We go to art fairs, we do art dinners, we do artist talks, just all ways that we can expose the work. During the global pandemic or global lockdown, we did virtual studio visits. It's just, again, my philosophy that you can't choose to acquire the work until you have an opportunity to experience the work. So just try to find creative ways in doing that.
Have you found since you opened your space and you were first kind of introduced to photography, do you think the representation has improved and you're seeing more diversity, or are you kind of still a minority of gallerists and dealers that are presenting the work?
That's a really great question. I think there is improvement, but I think there's so much more work to be done. I'm glad and think it's wonderful when artists get their due recognition, but it is through the hard work of it trying to expose the work for it to be seen. So I do think that things have gotten better, but there's just a lot more to be done. I think for the US, I am the only African-American gallerist that shows exclusively photography.
Really?
I think so. I've not found another one
Wow.
that's just exclusively photography in all these years. I mean, there are many galleries that show photography, which is great and wonderful, but they also show, painting and sculpture and a traditional gallery. But my business model is exclusively fine art photography. And yeah, I've not found one yet. And I'm sure there's one around, but I just haven't been introduced yet.
Wow, I don't know how to react to that. If that's, yeah.
I know, right? It's kind of astonishing. It's like either the idea hasn't caught on yet, or I'm kind of have a strong passion for this. I might be the only one.
Because I was wondering as well, how is it with going to fairs like AIPAD when you're sort of presenting a very specific voice that is, one would argue, underrepresented? Are there then people from around the US, but also internationally, that attend the fair and also come to Atlanta to a gallery that resonate with those voices within photography?
Okay, let me back up for a second. I mentioned to you that my husband and I are collectors. Yes. And so starting the gallery a bit later in life, after getting my master's and my other careers and being a stay-at-home mom and all that good volunteer work and all that good stuff, I had a philosophy early on that for the gallery that I'm going to show work that my husband and I would collect, that I would live with. And that might be a very interesting kind of business model as well, but it's just more authentic for me. And anything that you see from my gallery at art fairs or at the gallery or online, it is work that I would also have. And so that's my mustard seed test. And it makes it kind of easy, really, for me, because I'm not showing work that, I can't I'm really behind the work, in other
Yes.
words.
No, I know what you mean.
And I know all gallerists are behind their artist's work, but just me in particular, I've just chosen to show work that I myself would hang in my home and live with, provided I have some wall space left.
That was Arnika Dawkins from Arnika Dawkins Gallery in Atlanta. Also based in Atlanta is Anna Walker Skillman from Jackson Fine Art, who takes us back to the beginnings of studying art history and discovering photography.
So I'm Anna Walker Skillman. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, which is not far here from Atlanta, not a real sophisticated city, but a great golf course. And I went to school at UGA, and then I moved to San Francisco for a couple of years, and I worked for Cheryl Haynes. And so I first was introduced to photography because Frankel Gallery was in the building, and I fell in love with Helen Levitt, and she was having an incredible show at the SF MoMA. And then I ended up moving back to Atlanta after a year. It's the Southern blood. San Francisco it felt a little foreign to me. It was beautiful, but it was kind of hard to dip my feet. The water was a little cold. But anyway, I moved back to the South, and I worked for a painter. His name's Tod Murphey, and I had an incredible 7 years of really being in the middle of his studio, watching an artist work. His work is based in photography, but he does painting and sculpture, mixed media. And when he moved away to move back to Virginia, he introduced me to Jane Jackson. And the first visit I made at the gallery, probably in 96, was to go through Yamamoto's box that Jane had. And I fell in love with the gallery. And when he moved away in 97, he introduced me to Jane, and I started working for her. It was late 97, the beginning of 98. I remember my first AIPAD, I think, was 1998, which is crazy.
Wow.
And there's a little house in Buckhead. It's called East Shadowlawn. And there was this little Tudor white house. And we had been there since 1990. And we just moved across the street. We built a new structure, which is very much like the small house. I didn't want a big, cold gallery. So we have a lot of little rooms, but we do have a bigger space. And we've been here since 2023. But I've been coming down the street since I was 27, and I'm 54. So every single day. I don't know how long, but in 2003, Jane had the opportunity to curate Sir Elton John's collection, and she asked if I'd like to buy the gallery. And at that point, I was married to a public school teacher, and I worked for a gallery. So as a director, and didn't really have the backing. And I found a friend of the artist that I work for that came on board. His name's Andy Heyman, and he worked in tech and currently works as a venture capitalist. And we partnered in 2003, and we've been partners since then. So he has helped me grow the gallery over the last 20 years and kind of understand the real business part of it, which was, technology, bringing technology in fairly early. I think we started SEO in 2005, and built our website. And so he's been really instrumental in the business part of it because, I studied art history and came from very little business background. My dad was a car salesman. My mom was a bookkeeper. So I pay artists and I can sell, but I don't have business acumen. So he's been really incredible to help sort of guide me in making some of the more complex decisions. So that's sort of and I was on the board of AIPAD probably in 2015. So I was looking at the different questions, but yeah, I was on for a year or so. But yeah, it's been a really great career, really interesting. AIPAD has been the foundation. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of shifting happening in the art world now, but AIPAD has really given me, especially starting 1998 and Jane being part of AIPAD from, I think, the early days, this wonderful group of trusted dealers that have worked pretty collaboratively together with artists. And it has been so important in really shaping my understanding of the medium, which, a lot of the contemporary art galleries are learning some of these sort of understanding or even creating their own rules today, but just understanding the medium itself. And I remember the first time a G clay print came in front of Jane and I were thinking, oh, wow, like what, are we going to be selling these, where before it was C prints and Cibachromes and dyes. And so, to be part of all of that transition has been really fascinating and exciting and difficult.
Yeah.
It's sort of like now I'm dealing with the fact that photography may not be on paper anymore. And I'm not even sure how I feel about that, with UV printing, but I'm trying to, it forces me to kind of be a little more flexible for someone who's probably not as flexible, but I've definitely enjoyed seeing like the transitions and really understanding the processes over 30 years, seeing the different ways of presentation for artists and guiding them in that direction. Because I have a history, somebody will come to me and say, print this on substrate and put a UV coating. And I'm like, yeah, well, don't put it into humidity because that UV coating will like shrink and then all this dust will get all over it and you're going to deal with that, So, it's nice to have the history of understanding the processes. But, with like female artists, I can just talk. You want to ask questions? I think that Jane really did champion, early on when I came into the gallery. She was already representing a number of female artists. She had several shows with, Sally Mann, and she was a champion of, Bernice Abbott, Helen Levitt. She had sold and shown some Dean Arbus, and Ruth Bernhard. So there was already a really strong kind of representation of female artists. And I think that naturally, over the last 20 years, I don't think so much intentionally, but almost instinctively, I have been drawn more to female artists. My own collection is women or images of women. And it's not a growing collection. I pretty much collected almost everything that I have in my collection in the early days of working with Jane and have been really satisfied and fulfilled with that collection. Also, given the fact I get to be around so much work all the time, it's almost like, oh, my collection anyway, the work. So. But I think it's really important. I think the first show that I curated at the gallery when I bought it was called In Her Own Backyard. And it was an artist who I knew here in Atlanta, Angela West, who graduated from Yale and was a friend, but also a young gallery artist. And I love the fact that, she was living here in our own backyard. And then also I paired her with Helen Levitt simply because I love the fact that Helen just photographed in her own backyard. And I think that, that in general is much of what female artists, not all, but many female artists, majority of them, if they're raising families, are photographing where they are. And I think that is, there's this whole notion that you have to leave where you are, but there's so many artists that really take like where they are and photograph, people like Sally Mann or people like Angela West, Sig Harvey, Julie Blackman. All of these artists are, photographing what's within their radius. And I love that. I think there's a beauty and complexity in those photographs, whether they're your kids or their landscapes but, I think that I was looking even at different statistics for us. And in 2024, of our top 10 artists financially that we sold, 5 were women, top price points.
Yeah.
Of those top 5 in the top 10, 3 were women. Women fell into the first, third, and fourth place of our top selling artists. One of the females who was at number 1 sold over $500,000 worth of artwork.
Wow.
And the top piece that we sold, the top selling price, was a secondary market piece that was by a woman, the top 1 piece. So also, so I think that's something really to be celebrated, because I'm just looking at 2024 and I'm thinking, wow, the top selling artists, our top 10, 5 are women, and of the top 5, 4 are women. And of the top 4, the number one seller is a female with over $500,000 in sales that year.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's impressive. I think that part of this is because women are more independent, today, and they're supporting themselves, and I think there's there's shifts in the way of, over generations, females at home or females out in the workforce. But I think there are more women who are artists are seeing it. It's not a hobby, it's a career. I think we get so many people ask for donations from artists, and I'm like, this is a career. This is, this is not a hobby. They just don't have, if you want to pay them, we're happy to give you half and donate my half. But, this is our career. So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you were saying with the price points. And I wonder if the conversation that's always happening is around contemporary art and less so on photography. But if you think back to the sort of when you started, was there a disparity between like the female photographers in the vintage days of photography?
It's so funny. I mean, I try to think back at that time, and we did show male and female artists. I don't even remember differentiating the two or thinking about it in that way. Maybe it was just because of my age. I just remember that I was more drawn to female artists and the work that they were doing. And I think that kind of shaped the artists that I selected for the gallery, which in turn shaped the collectors that purchase from the gallery. I mean, you certainly kind of have a following of people that are collecting works that, that you love and that you're representing. But, I never really thought about it during that time. I think that I was maybe just wrapped up in the whole wonderment of, of less so the business part and more so being part of the community than thinking, wow, men are really sort of, I did note obviously that there were so many more men that had opportunity, especially in the fashion world. I remember thinking that there's so many more men photographing in the fashion world early on than female photographers. But I think that definitely changed. I think that there are a lot of great male and female artists in all kinds of, whether they're different nationalities or, LGBTQ, there's so much great work.
That was Anna Walker Skillman from Jackson Fine Art. Yancey Richardson will be joining us next. However, I wanted to remind everyone that this episode is brought to you by AIPAD and The Photography Show. AIPAD represents fine art photography galleries around the world and is proud to present the 2025 edition of its flagship event, The Photography Show. The fair will showcase photography from the earliest processes to the cutting-edge contemporary work that pushes the boundaries of the medium. April 23 until 27 at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. Go to www.aipad.com/show for more information and to plan your visit.
I think that Yancey's on.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Just quickly, we didn't plan for Yancey and Anna to be on the call together, but it did work out. So before Yancey Richardson talks about her early days with her gallery in New York, I asked both to reflect on the early experiences of representing female photographers and if men and women do in fact make different kinds of photography. I thought we could overlap with a question that maybe you could both answer, because you both started in the 90s and you came in from that overlap of vintage into contemporary. And Yancey, Anna and I were just talking about how on Anna's roster, actually, top 10 of her sales are from females. And I was trying to discern whether or not it was the same sort of thing or at least in the early days, if there was an imbalance with how much men's work sold for versus women's work.
Well, I never analyzed it that way in terms of which gender was producing the most revenue for the gallery. I actually never did, so I never thought about that.
I don't think we did early on. It's only been since I had my business partner that we're just curious in terms of he's a big statistical guy, so he loves statistics
Metrics.
and so metrics, and so We started looking at that the last 5 years or so, but I don't recall either. And I think I was saying to you earlier that you were asking in the early days, like, did you notice more men and, versus women? And I don't even think it was like on my radar. Like, I wasn't like, I'm representing more or Jane's representing more men than female artists. I think it kind of always felt somewhat, and it probably wasn't equal, but I'm sure it wasn't, but I never thought about it in that way.
Yeah, and I didn't set out to represent or to build a stable of female artists, although somewhat early on, people started remarking that I had a lot of female artists.
Oh, really?
And I think that just happened sort of organically. Yeah, I would say I was just looking for some of the best work that I could work with at that time, work that intrigued me and that I was excited about. And I wasn't thinking about it as a plan for the gallery to represent female artists. It's really shifted. For me, it's really about the work and not so much about the gender. But I do go through phases where I'm either working with or showing a lot of female artists.
Yeah, I think Anna was saying she's always selected the work based on what she's resonated with. And I was the same with my gallery. My wife and I, we just chose the work first. And then later we thought, oh, look, we have more women actually than men on our roster just because of the work that we picked. Actually, both of you perhaps could take turns answering this. Do you think, and I'm asking because I'm curious about this myself, is there an aesthetic or a way of approaching photography and image making that is on either end of the gender spectrum? Like, is there a more masculine way of taking photos and is there a more feminine way of taking photos, or ones that men are more likely to make or that women are more likely to make that would cause like an approach to the subject matter or something that's different in that way? Because if I'm resonating with a certain kind of work and it's majority made by women, would that suggest that there's a difference in how subject matter is photographed?
It's a very interesting question. Mm-hmm. And I would say yes, actually. I wouldn't have thought of it. Again, it's not something I would have thought of, but when I think about the female artists that I represent versus the male artists, I think there is a distinction. I think more of my female artists deal with the body and either portraiture or kind of narrative image making that's like the constructed image. And I'm thinking about this also over time, but currently now, for instance, Zanelli Maholi and McLean Thomas are both women artists that I represent. Zanelli either photographs other individuals or themselves. McLean photographs women. I have two new artists that I'm going to show later in the season, Maria Antelman and Jenny Calavas. Jenny Calavas has made a series of self-portraits of herself buried in the sand, buried in the earth. And Maria Antelman has made a series of photographs that include bodies and body parts in conjunction with the natural landscape, all in black and white. Whereas like the male artists that I'm involved with, like Mitch Epstein, he's photographing either the American scene or the American landscape, or Anthony Hernandez, again, he's photographing like the social landscape in Los Angeles. He's not making portraits. He's not dealing with his own body. And
kind of an external, internal.
Yeah, it's very, exactly. I do think it's very different.
Well, Yancey, I'm just going to say, is such a trailblazer. She's someone I look up to in terms.
Just because I'm older than she is.
Well, no, it's not just that. I feel like that I'm always looking at what Yancey is showing because she really has taught me to look at artists differently. I'll never forget, she was showing Zanelli at an art fair years and years ago, and there were portraits, not of Zanelli, but of other. It was the early work, the first
faces and faces work.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, what is happening here? And just like sitting with it and like looking at it, and I just am always have so much admiration for her eye because it is. I definitely have a little bit of a softer eye. She has very tough subjects, especially around females. I mean, she was one of the first people, to bring about, Alex Prager's work, which was so
wow.
loaded. Yeah, it was her.
Yeah, I did Alex's first show.
She was Alex's first show. And to watch these different artists that she still is bringing, now you're talking, I don't know either of these women that you're talking about that are working in black and white, which is that's a hard thing it's not an easy seller, it's not.
No, it's not decorative.
Yeah, it's not what everyone's looking at. And neither was Zanelli at the time. I mean, it was and look, I just have, it is really such a pleasure to be able to have someone like Yancey who I can sort of look up to, and the kinds of things that she's showing, and the incredible hard work, years after years. I mean, she's still out there. It's a little, I'm a little safer. I'm a little safer in what I do, but I love to see her, she has so much courage in what she's showing and has so much passion and belief in these artists. So, and especially female artists, because you really have championed a lot of these, this not easy work,
Well, Anna, thank you.
True.
I want you to stop, but yeah, when I first showed Zanelli in 2012, I told people I was going to do the show of this Black queer South African artist who photographed other Black queer lesbians.
Wow.
And then my colleague said, okay, good luck with that. But the work was so strong. So, So again, regardless of gender, I'm just looking for work that I think is super strong and that blows me away. I'm excited about. And I just pray that if I feel that way, that other people might as well. But then I also have female artists who make this beautiful work. We have a show up right now of Sharon Core, whose work often deals with still life and flowers. There's an artist, Mary Ellen Bartley, that Anna has also shown that deals with still life. So I think when I think about it, the male artists are very external, and the female artists that I represent, like Sharon Core, Laura Latinsky, Mary Ellen Bartley, all making still lives. So that's more in the interior space and in the studio. And then Alex Prager. Oh, and then we're starting to represent now a female artist from Mexico, Tanya Franco Klein. So both of those artists create this work that's got this sort of cinematic quality, and it feels like a film. But I don't have any men doing that. My male artists make when I think about it, make a different kind of work. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, too, that all female artists that I've represented at some point in time have always gone back at some point and done a series on florals.
Yeah.
There's a pull where they're doing very different work, and then suddenly they'll look at this new series of florals. I'm like, oh my God, it's happened again. Doing it.
The only artist I have that does work with flowers is Ori Gerst. But then he's blowing them up.
Yeah, right? Like a boy would do.
It's not like this
man would do, blow up the flowers.
Perfect scene that's just composed and calm and still. It's almost not a still life. It's an exploding bouquet. Yeah, it's funny to think about. I'm looking to see who I have in here. I have an Ori Gerst in here. Yeah, John Davola. John Davola also working outside of the studio. He has photographed himself intermittently, but in a very different way, not a sort of contemplative way. But for the most part, he photographs in spaces outside of the studio.
Yeah, when I was looking at because I didn't know if your early roster of exhibitions would be reflective of what you're doing now. And when I went back, as far as I could go back on your website, which I think was to 2000, it's still really diverse. You've always done what you're doing. There wasn't a point where you felt like, I'm going to try different things now. I felt like it's from initially, it wasn't just showing Robert Frank and showing the kind of classics. there was always a
Mhm.
mixture and like a healthy range of diversity of when you're looking at the artists, like different backgrounds. But I think aesthetically, it's like a really vibrant mix of work, which is, yeah, it's really great that you've always done that.
It's pretty eclectic. I couldn't define, I remember people, maybe an artist who's interested in the gallery saying, well, what are you looking for? And I mean, like, it's not subject matter or formal approach that defines what I'm doing. It's just trying to decide if the work is really good.
Mm.
So, but and a lot of the artists are pretty experimental with the medium. A lot of the artists, the work might be not always, but conceptually based, politically based, or experimental in different ways. But not always. There's nothing that really defines. I don't have a formula for the gallery. It's work that I'm impacted by. I feel strongly about.
Yeah, I think that's a good, if you had to pick a word, I think looking through your roster and the artists that you've worked with over the years, it's certainly I feel like with a lot of the artists, especially with the ones that I'm not familiar with, I feel like I'm looking at something that I haven't seen before, which is
That's
when
nice.
I've been around for a while, looking at a lot of work, you're like, yeah, this is not, I feel like I'm seeing new things, which is always really refreshing. But how is it for you when you very first started out? Because if Anna looks up to you, when did you get started in the field and how is it then versus now?
Well, I started as a private dealer, so I didn't have a public gallery for a while. And I was doing mainly buying and selling of secondary market material and working with a few contemporary artists. I mean, there's always contemporary artists looking for representation. So even though I didn't have a gallery, and I think I was just always drawn to contemporary artists, I like that exchange, that interaction. I've never lost that sense of kind of amazement and wonder about artists and how they see the world and how their minds work. They're like kind of rock stars and mystics to me. Early on, I was even then starting to work with some contemporary artists, but I was doing a lot of buying and selling of vintage work and working with other dealers who are still, colleagues today, but focused much more on the client, building collections and such. But I was itching to open a gallery, so I finally opened a gallery in 95. And I opened with, my first show was Sebastião Salgado.
Wow,
and,
okay.
I shifted pretty quickly to focus on living artists and then doing shows and building the roster from there, showing both black and white and color, men and women, older and younger. It's really a variety of artists and approaches. So it just evolved from there.
Were you one of the first, maybe?
I moved to Chelsea in 2000. Sorry, that's the history. I opened in a small gallery in 95 by a former colleague of ours, Julie Saul, who's now deceased, but I took over her space. And then 4 years later, realized Soho was sort of ending its run as the gallery hub in New York, and so moved to Chelsea. And I've been on 22nd Street in a couple of different spaces for 25 years.
Wow. What I was going to ask was when you started out, because if I reflect on the other, let's say, senior AIPAD members I've spoken with, a lot of people during that period were showing a lot of vintage work. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you were working on the secondary market, which I assume is also with vintage material. Were there many other galleries like showing contemporary photographers at that time?
Well, when I was very young, there was Light Gallery. And Light Gallery showed a lot of contemporary work. And a lot of the people that we think of as sort of maybe classic masters and such and are now deceased, they were alive at that time.
Yes.
So, Light Gallery was this very interesting gallery. When I think about it, a lot of people that have been in our business as dealers worked there at one point. Peter McGill worked there. Larry Miller worked there. Bob Mann may have worked there. I'm not sure. Just trying to think who else, but a number of people worked there. Anyway, so there was a bit of contemporary. To begin with, let me just back up and say there were almost no photography galleries. There was Whitkin Gallery and Light Gallery for the most part. And many people were dealing privately. And slowly but surely, people opened small galleries. Larry Miller and Howard Greenberg split a space down in Soho. But they were, Howard was dealing more on New York street photography and, more classic work. And Larry was showing some contemporary work. And then Janet Borden opened a gallery, and she had a really great program of, really, really interesting artists. And then some of the artists that were represented were at just bigger contemporary art galleries, like Robert Miller had a very interesting department of photography. And they had Jan Groover, for instance. So, it evolved over time. But in my case, I was mainly vintage until I opened the gallery, and then I really focused more on contemporary for the most part. And then just was trying to build my program, find the artists that weren't otherwise represented, that I could represent, that I thought were really strong, and, evolve from there.
Yeah, it sounds like you've kind of paved a path not just for females running galleries and showing female artists, but just maybe people that want to present photography in general, really.
Well, in the history of art galleries, there have been amazing female dealers. I mean, when I think about it, and if you looked at the history of art galleries, Ileana Sonnabend, Peggy Guggenheim, Betty Parsons. I mean, I could go on. If I had been prepared, I'd have a whole list here. But a lot of the most important gallerists have been women.
Yes.
Actually. So that's a whole thing to look at. I don't know if that's particularly true in the photography business. I have to think about it. When I opened my gallery in Soho in this building, 560 Broadway, there was a whole story because I became the 5th female woman dealer in that building, focusing on photography, because it was Janet Borden, Julie Saul, myself, and then Ethelene Staley and Taki Wise, who together ran a gallery. So there were five women dealers in one building. Wow. Focusing on photography.
That's amazing.
Yeah, is that interesting? But I think, I don't know, that would be an interesting thing to look at, just sort of historically, in terms of galleries run by women, and then galleries run by women that are focused, particularly in photography.
Yeah, true. Looking at even vintage photography, there were loads of great women photographers through the last 100 years. Like, it wasn't a shortage. And I think even as you both select work based on the quality, if I think about other dealers I've spoken to that show vintage work, they're just looking for good photography. They're not thinking, who made this? If they found like a box of great prints and negatives, like, this is really good, people need to see it. Like, kind of the identity of the artist is, I feel like it's a recent thing.
Yeah, I do. Well, I think the whole art world has been, for maybe 10 years or so, very attuned to identity in art. So, whatever identity you want to strike, whether it's your sexuality or your gender or your race or your whatever. But I'm just thinking about it. If I think about the vintage material I dealt with, except for maybe Imogen Cunningham or just a couple of people, it was almost all men.
Okay.
I think that would be the case. And
what was attractive for collectors, you mean?
Yeah, what we were dealing in. It was, well, like you say, Ansel Adams, Robert Frank, Harry Callahan, Irving Penn. It was mainly men, almost no women. Maybe there was Cunningham, Bernice Abbott.
Helen Levitt.
Yeah, Helen Levitt.
Ian Arbus, Ruth Bernhard, Louise Dolwoff, and Dorothea Lange.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, maybe there were more women. I don't know that I felt that I was dealing so much with women artists. They were, definitely there and good, for sure. I don't know. I would say that female artists can be at a disadvantage just because they are mothers,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a huge demand. I mean, it changes your life, and it's a big demand on your time. And artists are pretty egocentric, but female artists who are mothers can't be,
Yeah.
because they have to. So they have to have a lot of energy, basically. A lot of my female artists have no children. I mean, that's another interesting thing to think of, but I just think it gives them less time to be out and about in the world, showing their face, showing up for things, going to exhibitions and showing up in New York and promoting their work. So I think female artists can be at some disadvantage. Once they start families, I mean, I don't discourage it. I'm a mother too, and as a mother a couple of times over. I know of artists who have multiple kids, but trying to find that studio time and the time to be out promoting and marketing their work, it's difficult.
And
Yeah,
not just
definitely.
the kids, just the household, running a household.
Running a house.
And running, kids and all the things that, trying to make a living too and making your work. And it is a nonstop job and sometimes thankless, but you have to be in it.
Do you have children, Michael?
I have two. I have
Two.
my daughter's 4 and my son's 18 months.
Oh,
Yeah, so-
great.
Congratulations. Fun. I miss those days.
I know when I'm around that, I'm like, oh, I miss that so much. And then when I think back, half the time, all I wanted was time to myself.
Today, I always remember today's Elton's birthday because my daughter was born exactly 2 days, my first daughter, after his birthday on Easter. Because the reason I know that is that the day that, I guess it was a Saturday on the 26th, Bon Jovi and Ingrid Sheesky came into the gallery because they had been to Elton's birthday on the 25th. And then I went home and I went into labor. And gave birth on Easter morning. So it's always like, when y'all are like, let's meet on the 25th, I'm like, it's Elton's birthday. And, I always have this like.
You also must have been, when they came into the gallery, you must have been so pregnant.
Well,
Yeah.
I was 37 weeks pregnant and had just gotten off bed rest for 3 months, 1 week in the gallery, and then delivered my daughter who's 20 this coming up. So, this is always a very special week. So those are the good memories that we can have as mothers. But yeah, it is hard. It is I watch artists of mine that are mothers that really, really struggle. And it's a emotional struggle. They need to be home cooking, taking care of the kids, but they want to be in the studio. And it's just a constant, you can't really be selfish, but they are very selfish. They are selfish people as artists, and they have to be selfless. And it's just a really difficult, and then they also have to, once they have kids, something that's really important, they have to kind of look at what all they're missing because they're watching, peers of them move up in the art world.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's why, in some ways, like I even more so want to, and I worked with the artist. We're going to do a show this fall with Sam Taylor Johnson. And 17 years ago, we did a show with her. And now, like 17 years later, she's done a lot of other things, kind of bringing her back into the fold of the art world and something she hasn't been a part of for a while. So I think that I love seeing that rebirth and kind of recreating yourself and, constantly changing. And I guess being a female myself, I know what that's all about, especially being in your mid-50s, what that feels like as an artist, or early 60s, what that must feel like as an artist, been through all the phases. So I think it's there's such an importance to support that.
It was a real honour speaking with these 4 inspiring women, each of whom has made a meaningful contribution to the photography gallery landscape. Not only for women, but I think really for anyone who has a vision and is passionate about photography that they want others to experience. Check the show notes for links to POLKA Galerie, Arnika Dawkins Gallery, Jackson Fine Art, and Yancey Richardson Gallery, as well as to the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. In the next episode of the series, I'm speaking with Douglas Marshall and Michael Hewlett, both alumni of the Peter Federman Gallery, and so far the first millennial photography dealers I've spoken to this season, so it'd be great to hear insights of the new generation of gallerists. If you want to be the first to hear new episodes, please subscribe to Subtext Discourse Art World podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone else interested in the overlap of photography and the art world, please send them a link to the show. Podcasting is obviously a broadcast medium, however I'm happy for listeners to reach out. You're welcome to follow me on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky and LinkedIn at Michael Dooney. Otherwise, you can go to my website, www.michaeldooney.net. There you will also find the International Photo Festival database I put together, as well as my webinar for photographers and artists working in lens-based media to better understand the art marketplace and get their work into galleries. I think that's everything. Thanks again for tuning in. My name's Michael Dooney, and you've been listening to Subtext and Discourse.